You don't call yourself a photographer. You're very careful to, because you're very humble. Why did you start photographing murals? And I know you've called it the hobby that got out of hand. How did the hobby start?
The hobby started in 1981, and if you know anything about the history of the North here, you know that 81 was a very significant year, and the main significance was the Republican prisoner hunger strike. For the most part, there hadn't been murals in nationalist and Republican areas from the creation of the state up to 1981. Main reason being that they couldn't have easily got away with it, you know, in a unionist state with a unionist monopoly and a unionist friendly police force, etc. But the hunger strike changed all that. Huge support for the hunger strikers. One of the outworkings of that was that some young Republicans started painting murals. Quite a few in a short period of time. I estimate probably 300 in the spring and summer of 1981. And they were there in your face if you ever went into any nationalist area. I'm from West Belfast. My parents still lived there at the time, although I didn't. So I was seeing these all the time, and I just started taking photographs. Two things happened afterwards, after the hunger strike was over, in the autumn of 81. One is that the Republicans continued painting murals, so I thought, well, I'll continue photographing. And the second thing was that I realised that there'd been murals there the whole time I'd been growing up. I would no more have thought of photographing them as I would have photographed a tree on the street, but they started to take a significance for me, so I started photographing them. And then after a while, I thought maybe somebody should do a book, maybe that somebody should be me, da-da-da-da-da. And that's why I say it's the hobby that got out of hand.
Yeah. The way we kind of structured it was having 7 themes going throughout the exhibition, but we wanted to start, or certainly I wanted to start with the origins and kind of talking about one of the earlier murals. So
this one is King Billy mural. King Billy on the left, and then the relief of the Siege of Derry on the right. Mm-hmm. That was first painted in the old fountain area in 1916 by Bobby Jackson. And later on in the 60s, when they were redeveloping the area, I've been told this, it sounds plausible, is that the locals were happy to agree to the redevelopment process, but they insisted that they wanted to reinstate the mural at the end because it had been such an important thing to them. So when they built the new part, they built a wall solely for the mural to be reprised. Now that wall later fell down, and the grandson of Bobby Jackson got another wall close by and has done the 3rd generation of that mural, which is there now. So although that's not the original mural, it has a strong link to the beginnings of murals in 1908 here. Unionist murals, King Billy, Battle of the Boyne, repeated. That's one from then. This second one in Taverna Street's from 2008, and it just shows you something of the longevity.
Yeah, absolutely. You're now a leading authority on, I know, yeah. As I say, you're very humble, but it's true. You've travelled a lot with kind of speaking about political murals, and I know you've said that the fact that our practice here is ephemeral and it changes all the time, and like muralists will paint over murals. I think I've heard you say before that that's not necessarily common in other situations.
Yeah. Not common at all. You find a lot of places in the world, you find artists saying things like, you know, or muralists who are artists saying things like, you know, oh, we're bringing the art to the people. This is our gallery of the streets. But the trouble is that the use of some of those words gives a different tone to things. Like to talk about a gallery, the last thing you'd want me to do is take these 2 down and throw them in a skip. Because I want to put something else up there, because these are now artifacts for you that you're going to keep. The muralists here don't think in those terms. They don't think of it as a gallery. They don't think of permanence. What they do is they see it as a way to get a message across. And that message is usually time-specific. It's often site-specific, if you know what I mean. It relates to something that happened in that area.
The context of the situation, yeah.
And so sometimes then things change, you know, there's a different issue that becomes more important in that area, or there's a major commemoration coming up, and so they have no trouble whatsoever destroying the mural in order to put the new one up. I do know muralists in the United States in particular who really, you know, nearly weep when I say to them that muralists here destroyed their murals. Because if somebody destroyed one of their murals, it would be huge news about censorship and fascism and God knows what else, you know. They think more in those sort of And I'm not insulting them. It's just a different mentality. They think more in those gallery terms or those art terms, which the muralists here don't necessarily at all.
What was the conversation that led to drawing support for the titles of your books?
In the late 80s, I decided I should tape record some of the early muralists while we still knew who they were and where they were. And I didn't know what I was going to do with the tape recordings except transcribe them, which I did, and I still have them, and I've never used them. And one of the people I taped was a young guy called Kez, and Kez was in the Beachmount area. Now, the mural started off in West Belfast and Beachmount and Ballymurphy almost about the same time. And Kez was in there as a teenager painting right away. So I said, Kez, what did the Republican movement think of your murals? The prisoners were in H blocks, and very often they were just referred to as the blocks. So Kez said to me, oh, they thought we were doing a great job drawing support for the men on the blocks. And I heard that, didn't register. I transcribed it, didn't register. And sometime later I was looking at it, and it was like this phrase just jumped out at me. What a wonderful metaphor, you know? So when I got around to doing the first book, I decided that had to be the name for it, because that's what the murals were about mobilization, about drawing support. These murals are very local. They're saying to the community in which they exist, this is where we stand, be with us. You know, they're propaganda in the proper sense of that word. They're saying, this is the position, are you with us or are you not? So they're directed very much into the community rather than shouting out across barriers or whatever. I think that's the way I see them anyway.
I think I initially had about 14 themes, which is far too many. So we did end up bringing it down to 7 and sort of combining quite a few. We felt conflict and memorials, I think, was an easy choice to begin with, because it's something that I feel like a lot of people associate that with the murals.
If you talk to a lot of people and you ask them what's in the murals, they'll say guns, guns, guns. Yeah. And so we got a lot of guns going on here for the most part. And the point of it is that a lot of the murals were about the armed conflict that was going on, that was either about loyalists holding guns to protect Ulster, Republicans holding guns in order to reunify Ireland, women holding guns unusually. I say unusually because you would have seen that now and again in Republican murals, but only once in one loyalist mural have I seen women with guns. If the exhibition stopped there, it would be false. Yeah. It wouldn't tell you. Did we ever move beyond this? And a wee hint of a clue is in the one at the bottom there of the loyalist women. Yeah. Now, they're preparing food parcels for prisoners. That's what I understand is going on in that one. But the point is that if you move on to today, and in fact, move on to the turn of the millennium and the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement, Republicans moved away from painting guns. There'd been a ceasefire, there'd been a peace process, there'd been finally a dumping of arms and an acceptance of a political route to change. So they dropped the guns from the murals, the only exceptions being memorial murals and historical murals. If there was a gun, in 1916, it gets painted in an Easter Rising mural, or these comrades painted with their guns. The point about those guns is that they're not contemporary guns, they're old guns. Right? So no new guns in murals for the most part. The loyalists have had a much harder time. So if you do move from this snapshot of the earlier days on, you'll see the Republican murals, the guns in Republican murals going like that. And you see the guns in the loyalist murals going like that. In fact, for a while, that. And then it's declined somewhat now, but they're still there. There are still new murals being painted with masked men pointing guns, and sometimes something I never saw in a Republican mural, pointing the gun at you, the viewer, which I think is one of the freakiest things of all, when you're standing there looking at it.
We were conscious for some people, especially local people kind of coming into them, these are probably some of the most challenging images. Sure. Especially given kind of the place we're at now, and knowing that there are still images of armed gunmen on our walls and things. But it was important to represent that's still kind of there.
There's a mural in East Belfast that commemorates four UVF men. And I know that there was a commemoration a couple of years ago in honour of one of them. And some people objected because he had killed their relative. So, this is not just paint on a wall. This is, This is people's memories, people's lives, people's trauma, and you're parading it for all to see. So I get it that people would find these problematic, to say the least, or offensive, to go even further. I get it. Flight of the Earls, the relief of the Siege of Derry, 1916 in Dublin, and this one here. This one's really interesting to me. It's in Edmonton and Derry, and it's got the story of John Meek of the 36th Ulster Division going to the aid of Willie Redmond, who was injured in no man's land. Now the point is, Willie Redmond was in the 16th Irish Division, and he was the brother of John Redmond, the Home Ruler. And John Meek is a regular guy in the 36th Ulster Division, which came out of the UVF. You could almost get a community relations grant for this mural, in the sense that, here's the UVF Ulsterman going to the aid of the nationalist Southerner. I once came across a loyalist painting a mural in Ballymoney, and it was an armed masked man. And he says, "What do you think of the mural?" I says, "Oh, it's good." He says, "What?" I said, "Can I be honest with you?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "I don't care if I never see another masked man on a mural." And he says, "Me too." I says, "Wow. And why are you painting it then?" He says, "Well, that's what they told me to paint." I said, "Okay, what would you like to paint?" And he told me the story. Now, this was probably about 1992 or 1 even. I had never heard of this story. Given my background and my upbringing, I'm not into military history. And he told me the story. He says, "I want to paint that." I says, "That's a great story. Go ahead, paint it." He says, "Oh, no, they won't let me." Which I thought was really sad. But then when years later, 2019, I saw this in Edmonton, I thought, right, good. Finally you've got to a point where you're allowed to paint that. That's progress. So this is culture, and it's pretty wide the way it's put there, because it's got, as I say, monarchy. It's got women shirt workers in Derry. It's got orange parades in terms of the guy playing the flute for Peter Mandelson. That mural wasn't about orange parades per se at all, although this one from Garvaghey Road was. This is Irish culture being shown. It's not saying anything against the Orange Order or against the parade or the church service or anything else. In fact, it says, "Fáilte go dtí bóthar Garvaghey, welcome to Garvaghey." These aren't usually explicit. They're usually just saying, this is where I stand on royalty, language, whatever. The language ones you've got here from Pobble, an organisation to promote the Irish language and Irish language business in particular. And it's got, in mural terms, it's a bit cluttered, but it's clear that it's about Pobble. It's clear that it's about the Irish language, and it's clear that, as it says in the bottom left there, language rights are human rights. There have been a number of murals on Ulster Scots identity, only one of which that I know of actually uses some Ulster Scots in it. And this is it. Hame is where the heart is.
And that was something I kind of wanted to have, because I think I see Irish in Republican murals a lot more, and the actual language of it. And then prison I think it was one of my easier themes to select out. Can you tell me a wee bit about your journey to get into photograph these? You're the only person who's, well, other than someone from the outside, are you the only person who came in to photograph, do you think?
I believe I am. How this came about was towards the end of the special category status. End of the 1990s. The prisoners all got out. The last remaining politically motivated prisoners got out in the summer of 2000. So in the 2 years leading up to that, from the Good Friday Agreement, things relaxed in many ways. So one of the things that I thought was, I'd been told there were murals on the wings, on every wing, and I sought permission from the prison service to go in and photograph them, and I was refused. I then ran into a new assistant governor who'd been appointed here one night at something, I can't remember what it was, Irish-British St. Patrick's Day event or something like that, and got talking to him, and I said, "What's the odds?" And he says, "Oh yeah, that should be able to happen, phone me up." And I phoned him a number of times, and what happened was he kept saying the time's not right. And then I woke up one morning, and the main news was that Billy Wright had been shot dead in prison by the INLA. And I thought, that's it, I'm done for, I'll not get in now ever. So I phoned him up that morning, and he says, "Yeah, it's going to close down here a lot, but get in quickly, can you come tomorrow?" And I said, yes. I got permission from the officer commanding the IRA prisoners through a contact to invite me in. So I went in with my camera, my bag, everything, led down to the H block, very hard to take the photos because it was pre-digital. So the corridors are narrow and sometimes dark. So if you use a flash, you get flashback like you see in this one. If you don't use a flash, they're awful. This is the best I could do. On the basis of that, I then got through a friend, got in contact with the officer commanding the UDA and said, would you let me in? And he told me, now he may have exaggerated it slightly, that the guy was hesitating, saying, oh no, I'm not sure of this, not sure of this. And he said, well, he's photographed the Provost murals. And I said, what? And he hasn't photographed ours, let him in quick. So I got into the UDA wing. On the basis of that then, I contacted the UVF and they let me in. That was really nice because at the end, they were really nice to me, and I thought, this is awkward because I would have thought they'd use the opportunity to start arguing with me, but they didn't. It was a really pleasant meeting. And as I was leaving, the officer commanding says, do you know so-and-so? And I said, oh yeah. He says, because I taught her. He says, that's my sister. I said, right, that's how I got such an easy time.
Even like the example of you meeting that assistant governor at some sort of event, Northern Ireland is a really tiny place.
Aye.
And
thankfully sometimes.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And then was the INLA, and I got in touch with the officer commanding there. And the last wing was the LVF. And the LVF wouldn't let me in. Never replied. When the prison was closed down, right? They started doing things like they whitewashed all the murals prior to pulling the buildings down. I don't know why they went to that trouble, but the Northern Ireland office whitewashed all the walls. Interestingly, at one point I got a phone call from somebody in the Northern Ireland office saying, I believe you've been in photographing the murals. I said, yes, could you give us copies of them? And I said, no, you should have thought of that before you whitewashed them, and that was it. I didn't give them to them.
The Belfast Room is an interesting place to do an exhibition in because it's only walls, so we kind of have to keep it to flat framed things. And it's a big blank canvas. It's an all white room. But it's one of the older parts of the building. The founding stone of the Ulster Museum is just outside here. And so this part dates back to the 1920s. And I've always found whenever you come in through the doors and you come to this archway, this is what draws your eye into the back room. Because otherwise you might sometimes lose people before they kind of get to this length. So we wanted it to be impactful. I had said to you about, shall we make it quite big? I imagined, big. And then I went and spoke to our design department, and I will fully credit Stefan with this idea where he said, floor to ceiling.
You said you were going to do it big, and then at one point when we were meeting, you said 3.5 meters wide, and I said, what?
Yeah.
So I actually went home, and in my kitchen where there's a big blank wall, I measured out 3.5 by 1.75 or whatever it is, and I said, holy. I am so chuffed that you did this, and I know from talking to people who've come here that this is one of the things they take away with them, that this wall is just staggering. Credit where credit's due. It's staggering because it shows what has been done on that wall over the years on a scale where you can grasp what's happening. It's really interesting to look not just along, but compare and contrast, as it were. What I think is really interesting about it is two things, I suppose. One is you'll never see a clearer example of something we were talking about earlier, that these murals change all the time. It's not a gallery. We're in a gallery, but that's not a gallery because that's where drawing support is in your face. They're mobilizing support. All through the time that they were painting murals, that was blank until at one point quite a simplistic mural was painted about plastic and rubber bullets, where you had a silhouetted policeman here with a plastic bullet gun pointing, and at each point they painted the 17 victims of plastic bullets at the distance they were from the shooter when the gun was fired. So some of them were up here, some of them were back there. It was just a blue wall with silhouettes on it. And then it took off as being a site that could be used. It's now known as the International Wall or the Solidarity Wall. I'm not sure that was ever a decision. It's just that it happened to be that it evolved. And obviously, this is about Cian Nugent, the first blanket man. This is about Gaza. So obviously it's not all about international themes, but overwhelmingly, if you get the international themes on murals and Republican murals, it clusters on this wall. Yeah. And the final one that you added, and I'm really glad about this, that after the Hamas attack in Israel and then the constant relentless bombardment of Gaza since October by Israeli forces. The Republican muralists wanted to do something about this, and at that point in time, a woman in the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah who'd been to Belfast and seen this wall contacted me with an idea of some collaboration. Long story short, everybody was put in touch with each other. She sent over images from Palestinian artists, which then were reproduced in this wall. So it's a cluster of, there's still a few local themes, but the main point of that wall at the moment is 12 murals relating to Gaza, painted originally by Palestinian artists and reproduced by people here. But I've been helped massively on this by a friend from Liverpool called Peter Morrison, who's a bit of a whiz kid with computers. And these are not done panorama. I send him individual shots and he stitches it together that way. And what you find if you're really, well, no, I'll give the secret away, and people can come and look if they want, that all the background is constant, and he just drops the images in. If you look at this cluster of clouds here, there they are there, there they are there, there they are there. 17 years, that cloud has stuck there. Now that would be a good metaphor for Belfast, but it's not.
Do you know what made me laugh, and you're going to say it as well, that whenever he had dropped it all together for you, it looked
was
like
for
the
this
same.
one here, when I was doing the poster, it was all done, it looked brilliant. And I was about to send it to the printer, and then I said, wait a minute, Peter, that car's been stuck there for 3 years. Same car at the lights. He said, oh, flip. So I rushed back and took about 4 shots of different vehicles at the lights, sent them to him, and he dropped them in.
He dropped them in, I know.
And I remembered to do it for this one as well.
Yeah.
So that's the piece de resistance of the exhibition, I think.
In terms of connecting with armed struggles, it happened, that obviously is something that the Republican movement can do in sort of a direct comparison.
It's not just about armed struggle. If Republicans look around the world and they say these people are like us because they're suffering what we suffered, or they're doing what we did, or whatever. So it doesn't have to be a direct connection. There have been, going back to the 1970s, direct connections, for example, between the IRA and the PLO training together in Libya with Gaddafi's help. For example, if there's a mural at the moment around the corner from the International Wall about Sri Lanka and the Tamil Tigers, there wasn't that sort of link between Republicans and Tamil Tigers, but it's about saying, we know what you're going through because we've been there too. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because it's a bigger version of when people say, we really beat Germany in that match, 5 years ago. You weren't there, you weren't playing. But that's that we-ness of things. When it comes to resonance, Republicans have a lot of a sense of being like other people. It's a much more difficult thing for loyalists to say, who are we like and who is like us, which is why Israel comes up over and over again. I think it's really interesting if you walk to the right of this pro-Israeli one here. There's one that shows images from the First World War, and you've got some Sikh soldiers and some African soldiers. And you're saying that's what the resonance is. The resonance is empire, not resistance to empire, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah,
so it's a very different ball game. Yeah. This one is quite odd in that it's got a black face. I've never seen a black face in a loyalist mural other than that. It's got a woman, which again is very unusual in loyalist or unionist murals, and it's got a native North American. I'm not sure, maybe I'm putting words in the mouth, but I'm not sure if the native North American or the Ghanaian man there would basically say, that he's all for bonfires or drumcree or the siege of Derry, really makes his heart flutter when he thinks it. It's the religious connection that's more important there. It's about the Orange Order. The Orange Order as a religious organisation, which of course at base it is and says it is, but it is much more than that when it comes to conflicts that go on here. Okay, these are 2 in progress, but we could argue they're part of that international wall, or this international section. I want to say a bit about each of them. First is this one here, that's 1982 International Women's Day, a mural being painted that shows the longevity of this Palestine connection. There's a woman from the PLO, 1982, a woman from SWAPO, Southwest Africa People's Organization in Namibia, and an IRA woman, a coming to man woman in the middle. Now, this is a woman painting here, which is unusual. The guy standing up there is Kez, whom I mentioned earlier. I had taken that, didn't know who Kez was till later when I went to interview him. So that's the interesting connection in that one. This one here to me, now this, I have to tell the story because I love this one. You know, for a decade, for 2 decades almost now, people have been screaming at loyalist commanders who control the walls in their area in a way that Republican commanders never tried in Republican areas, screaming at them, paint something else. So you say, what? Well, how they've solved that is to move from illegal armed men to some extent to legal armed men. And what I mean is painting an awful lot about the First World War or displaying. There's, you know, doing printed things that are put on boards. So fair enough, but there's more there, and there's a complexity there that isn't touched in the murals. And let me tell you this one. For as long as 100 of us remain alive, we will never, never in any way consent to the rule of the Irish, for it is not for glory we fight, nor riches nor honours, but for freedom alone, which no man should lose but with his life. Where's that from? I took a long time back in the day before the internet to figure out where this was from. Yeah. And I found it. It's the Declaration of Arbroath, 1350 or something, 1320 something. 13. The background to that, very briefly, is this, that Robert the Bruce, going for independent Scotland, fought the English at the Battle of Bannockburn. Robert the Bruce was excommunicated by the Pope at one point in time, and he was harassed by the English, obviously. Incidentally, his brother, Edward Bruce, was the last High King of Ireland, because he moved over and took that role for a while. Anyway, Robert was isolated, and the bishops of Scotland, Catholic bishops, pre-Reformation of Scotland, got together on Arbroath and issued a declaration which basically called on the Pope to communicate Robert, because Robert was a sound guy fighting for the independence of the Scots against the English. So the Declaration of Arbroath says, for as long as 100 of us remain alive, we will never, never in any way consent to the rule of the English. That's the word, that's the original. So my challenge to loyalist painters would be put that word in and paint the Declaration of Arbroath now. And I'm not trying to say paint the Republican mural or anything, but you know, that's the complexity of your origins. If you say you're Scottish, part of what your background is that struggle of Robert the Bruce against the English, and the Battle of Bannockburn, and the Battle of Culloden, for flip's sake, you know, all those things. Where are they on your walls? They're not there, but that's the challenge, to try to see how would you get your head around painting those things that said something about your political identity but wasn't mistaken as a Republican mural. Yeah. That's the challenge.
This is quite an interesting one. In 2005, so 7 years after Belfast Good Friday, and these men are looking up towards Stormont, and progress is here.
Take this out, take that out, take the text out. Yeah. And that's the Ulster Worker Council strike. This is us bringing down a parliament, as it were, you know, from a UDA point of view. But then when you put these words in, there's a clash in a way between the imagery and the text. But it is ultimately about progress. This is a peace mural. Yeah. It doesn't look very peaceful without the text, but it is a peace mural. In the conflict transformation era, that is their commitment, that we've moved on from those days. I have to say, I deliberately positioned myself so I could get this in, which I thought is quite symbolic. Yeah. Give way, you know.
And then we come to the final section, nearly 120 years since the first political mural was painted here.
You have at least 3 ways in which murals appear on the walls. Now, one is a continuation of the political murals that we've had for 120 years. Guernica would fit in that. That was painted in a Republican area by Republican artists and one loyalist artist. You've got the Black Lives Matter one here with George Floyd. That was on the international wall, Republican area, Republican artists. Okay, so you've got those sorts of things, number one. Number two, you get murals that are done as part of street art now. either independently or as part of street art festivals like Hit the North. So you've got the women's one here, you've got the geisha, you've got the Terry Hooley display on Great Victoria Street that's one of the most recent murals pictured in here. And then you've the third one, organisations or businesses paying for murals commissioning on the side of their buildings. Now sometimes they're a direct advertisement, as it were, for the place. Like, for example, there's a health food shop on the Lisburn Road that has food painted on it, you know. But like, for example, there's a cafe on the Cavehill Road that has a swan on it, a huge swan, because it's opposite the waterworks where the swans are. So you've got this different mixture of murals going on now. We started by talking about the title, Drawing Support.
Yeah.
In this section here, New Directions, this mixed economy as I'm talking about. If you ask a question of each of these pictures, and indeed each of the many murals that are now, that you could put in this collection, what are they trying to do? Well, some of them are drawing support, right? There's drawing support for about gender violence. This is about racism. This is about supporting health workers during the pandemic. But what about these ones?
The more street
What
art
are what are these street art ones drawing support to? I mean, a geisha on the Shankill, Terry Hooley. Well, if you were a punk, and if you hung out in Good Vibrations back in the days, that would say to you something. But it would probably just, what would it say? It would say nostalgia. But what would it say about now? I'm just asking questions. Or Derry Girls. This is probably the most popular mural in Derry that almost gazumped, Free Derry Corner for a while, you know, because people loved Derry Girls and loved this mural. But again, what is it asking of you of this mural? What is this mural asking of you? These murals are asking you a question. More to the point, these murals are challenging you. Are you a loyalist? Do you support us? Are you a Republican? Do you support the hunger strikers? Whatever. These are making a demand of you. They're trying to mobilise your support. To me, these murals about, and please don't get me wrong, they're about spectacle. They're about saying, you stand in front of one of these murals and you go, wow, isn't that great art? Or wow, look at the size of that art. They move you, but they move you as a spectator. They don't move you to action necessarily. And that to me is the difference between street art actually worldwide and political murals worldwide. One demands action of you or challenges you to act. The others just get you to go, whoa, wow, look at that. You know, oh, I love Derry Girls. Oh yeah, I was a punk. You know, that sort of thing. I love living in a town where there's this mixed economy now. I love all the different reasons why you might get paint on walls in this town. It's better than having Coca-Cola ads in every corner, you know?
Yeah, sure.